The blood on the envelope had dried to a rust-brown stain by the time it arrived at my doorstep. My full birth name printed in shaky letters across the front. A name I'd never seen before in my 60 years of life. My fingers trembled as I tore open the seal, pulling out a single photograph of a young black woman holding an infant, both of them wearing clothes from 1964. The woman's face was a mirror of mine, only younger, and scrawled on the back were 4 words that made my knees buckle. They took you from me. Hey there, beautiful souls. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to my story today. I am curious, what part of the world are you tuning in from? Drop your city in the comments below. All right, let us dive into what happened to me. I gripped the porch railing, my breath coming in short gasps. The photograph slipped from my hand and fluttered to the wooden planks below. For 6 decades, I had called Dorothy and William Mitchell my parents. They'd raised me in their modest home in Atlanta, fed me, clothed me, sent me to college. They'd attended my wedding, held my children when they were born, and they'd both been dead for 15 years. My legs carried me back inside, muscle memory guiding me through the familiar hallway to the attic stairs. Dust motes swirled in the afternoon light as I climbed, each step creaking under my weight. The cardboard boxes I'd inherited from my parents sat exactly where I'd left them after the funeral. Untouched, their contents supposedly just old tax documents and receipts I'd never bothered to sort through. I yanked open the first box with such force that the cardboard tore. Papers scattered across the attic floor. Birth certificates, hospital records, newspaper clippings yellowed with age. My hands moved frantically, sorting through decades of documentation. Then I found it. A birth certificate with my supposed birth date, but the hospital listed didn't exist. I'd driven past that address 1,000 times. It was a parking lot, had been since the 1950s. The next box contained newspaper clippings from 1964. My fingers went numb as I unfolded one from the Birmingham Herald. The headline screamed in bold print, "Local infant disappears from hospital. Parents plead for return." The photograph showed a young couple, their faces contorted in anguish, the same woman from the envelope clutching a baby blanket. I spread the clippings across the dusty floor, arranging them chronologically. Each article told a piece of the story. A baby taken from the maternity ward during visiting hours, a massive search, suspects questioned and released. Then the articles stopped. The trail went cold after 6 months. The couple's names were listed as Gerald and Patricia Owens. Underneath one clipping, I found a folded piece of notebook paper, the handwriting unmistakably Dorothy's. The note detailed everything. How they'd been unable to have children. How William had connections at the hospital through his maintenance job. How they'd watched me through the nursery window and convinced themselves they deserved a child more than some young couple barely out of their teens. How they'd planned it for weeks, waiting for the right moment when the nurses were distracted during a fire drill. My chest constricted, heart hammering against my ribs. I pressed my palm against the rough wooden floor, trying to ground myself in something solid. The woman I'd called Mama had written those words in neat cursive, describing the kidnapping of an infant, describing me, as if she were jotting down a grocery list. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and opened the browser. The search for Gerald and Patricia Owens, Birmingham, Alabama, returned results immediately. A Facebook page appeared, maintained by someone named Marcus Owens. The profile picture showed an elderly black man, maybe 70 years old, standing beside a memorial headstone. I clicked through the photos with trembling fingers. Picture after picture of the couple from the newspaper clippings, aged but recognizable. Then I saw it, a post from 3 months ago. Still searching for my sister after 60 years. If anyone has information about the 1964 Birmingham hospital kidnapping, please contact me. We never stopped looking. The room spun. I had a brother. A real brother, connected to me by actual blood rather than the lie I'd been living. I screenshotted the post and noticed the contact information listed in his profile. My thumb hovered over the call button, but I couldn't make myself press it. Not yet. Instead, I descended the attic stairs and walked to my bedroom, pulling out the old photo albums I'd kept from childhood. Dorothy and William smiled at me from dozens of pictures, their arms wrapped around my small shoulders at birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school graduations. Every smile now felt like a weapon, every tender moment a carefully constructed deception. I slammed the album shut and hurled it across the room. It struck the wall with a satisfying crack, photos scattering across the hardwood floor like confetti at a funeral. My chest heaved as I stared at the wreckage. Images of my false childhood spread at unnatural angles, some face up, others mercifully hidden. The urge to destroy everything overwhelmed me. I yanked open my closet door and grabbed the shoebox where I kept my birth certificate, social security card, and other documents that bore the name Dorothy and William had given me. The birth certificate listed Dorothy Mitchell as my mother, delivered at a hospital in Montgomery. 2 hours from Birmingham, 2 hours from where I'd actually been stolen. My fingers traced the embossed seal, wondering which clerk had been bribed, which official had looked the other way. I threw the box against the dresser. Papers exploded outward, decades of carefully maintained lies floating to the carpet. The doorbell rang. I froze, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Through the bedroom window, I could see a police cruiser parked at the curb. My heart hammered against my ribs. Someone must have found the attic open, or maybe a neighbor had heard me destroying my room. I wiped my eyes and forced myself to walk downstairs, each step feeling like I was descending into quicksand. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could make out 2 figures. I turned the deadbolt with trembling hands. The officer on my porch was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes that immediately scanned my tear-stained face. Behind him stood a woman in plain clothes, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She carried a leather folder under one arm and studied me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Janice Mitchell?" the officer asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I'm Officer Stevens. This is Detective Laura Hayes from the Birmingham Police Department. May we come in?" I stepped aside, my legs somehow still functioning despite feeling like water. They entered, and Detective Hayes glanced around the living room before her eyes settled on the framed photos covering the mantel. More lies, more staged happiness. Detective Hayes opened her folder and pulled out a photograph. She held it up without speaking. The image showed a young black couple, the same faces I'd seen in the attic clippings, but this photo was professional, probably taken for an anniversary or special occasion. Patricia Owens wore pearls and a navy dress. Gerald Owens had his hand on her shoulder, both of them radiating a happiness that seemed to reach through time itself. "We received a DNA match this morning through the national database," Detective Hayes said. Her voice was steady, practiced, probably delivered this same speech to other victims. "You submitted a sample to one of those ancestry websites 6 months ago?" I had. A Christmas gift from my book club friends, something we'd all done together over wine and laughter. I'd forgotten about it entirely until this moment. Detective Hayes pulled out another document. "The match is conclusive. You're the biological daughter of Gerald and Patricia Owens. Your birth name was Lorraine Foster Owens." The name felt foreign in my ears, like she was speaking a language I'd never learned. Lorraine! That person didn't exist in my memory, had been erased before she could form a single coherent thought. "When?" I managed to croak out. "April 15th, 1964. You were 6 days old, taken from Birmingham Memorial Hospital during a shift change." Detective Hayes flipped through her folder, producing more documents, more evidence of my stolen existence. "The night nurse claimed she took you to your mother for feeding, but surveillance of the time showed she left through a back entrance. She was never seen again." My knees buckled. I grabbed the back of the sofa, my knuckles white against the upholstery. Officer Stevens moved forward slightly, ready to catch me if I fell. But I locked my legs and forced myself to remain standing. I would not collapse, not here, not in front of these strangers who were casually dismantling my entire existence with manila folders and clinical terminology. "The nurse's name was Dorothy Mitchell," Detective Hayes continued. "She worked at Birmingham Memorial for 8 months before the kidnapping. No prior criminal record. She and her husband William moved to Montgomery 2 weeks after your disappearance." Write exactly this story block. The room tilted sideways. I pressed my palm against the wall, feeling the cool paint under my skin, needing something solid to anchor me to reality. Dorothy Mitchell. William Mitchell. The names I'd called Mom and Dad for 60 years belonged to criminals, to thieves who'd stolen a baby and built their lives on that theft. I moved to the window, turning my back on the detectives. Outside, Mrs. Chen was pruning her roses, the same ritual she performed every Thursday afternoon. The normalcy of it felt obscene. I watched her gloved hands work the shears, snipping away dead blooms with practiced efficiency. "Where are they buried?" My voice came out flat, emotionless. "Montgomery Garden Cemetery, Plot 47B. I'd visited that plot countless times, brought flowers every Mother's Day, every Father's Day, stood in the summer heat and winter cold, talking to headstones that marked the graves of people I'd never really known. The rage started as a tremor in my hands, spreading up my arms until my entire body shook. I grabbed the coffee table, flipped it with one violent motion. Magazines and remote controls scattered across the hardwood floor. The ceramic bowl I'd made in a pottery class last spring shattered against the fireplace. The sound was satisfying, gave shape to the chaos exploding inside my chest. Officer Stevens stepped back, his hand moving instinctively toward his belt. Detective Hayes remained seated, her expression unchanged, as if she'd witnessed this exact reaction dozens of times before. I kicked through the scattered debris, pacing the length of my living room like a caged animal. Every photograph on the mantel was a lie. Every memory contaminated. The woman who'd taught me to bake bread, who'd braided my hair for school pictures, who'd held me through nightmares. She'd been the nightmare all along. The Owens family never stopped searching, Detective Hayes said quietly. Gerald died in 1998. Patricia passed last month. That's what triggered the DNA match. She'd maintained your sample in the database, updated it every year with the latest technology. I stopped pacing. Patricia Owens had spent 34 years searching for a daughter who lived 300 miles away, who'd never known she was lost. And she'd died without knowing the search had finally ended. They had other children? Detective Hayes nodded. Marcus and Gerald Owens, your brothers. They're the ones who requested we make contact. Brothers. The word felt strange, impossible. I'd been an only child, had spent my childhood begging for siblings, while Dorothy, the woman I couldn't think of as Mom anymore, had smiled sadly and said, God only blessed them with one precious gift. I walked to the bookshelf, pulled down a photo album, flipped through pages of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, school plays, found the picture I was looking for, me at 5 years old, gap-toothed grin, sitting on William Mitchell's shoulders at some forgotten fair. He was looking up at me with such obvious pride, such apparent love. The album hit the wall with a thud. Pages tore loose, photographs spilling across the carpet like fallen leaves. "I need you to leave." I walked to the door, yanked it open. Cool air rushed in, carrying the scent of Mrs. Chen's roses. Detective Hayes gathered her folders with deliberate care. Officer Stevens picked up his hat from the side table. They moved toward the exit, but Hayes paused in the doorway. "Your brothers would like to meet you." "When you're ready?" She left a business card on the entry table. I stared at it without touching it, as if the simple act of picking it up would make all of this irreversibly real. Their footsteps echoed down the hallway. The elevator dinged. Silence settled over my apartment like dust. I closed the door, pressed my forehead against the wood. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror in the hallway. Same face I'd seen every morning for 60 years, but now it belonged to a stranger. Lorraine Foster. Owens looked back at me with dark eyes that suddenly resembled no one I'd ever known. I pushed away from the door and walked to the kitchen. My hands found the kettle by muscle memory, filled it at the sink. Water splashed over the rim, soaking my sleeve. I didn't bother turning it off properly, just shoved the kettle onto the stove and twisted the knob. Blue flames licked up the sides. The business card sat on the entry table like a loaded gun. I could see it from where I stood. White rectangle against dark wood. My brothers. The word felt foreign, sharp-edged. I'd been an only child for 60 years. Patricia and Gerald had told me I was their miracle baby, born after years of trying. That story had shaped everything, made me careful, made me grateful, made me small. I grabbed my laptop from the counter and opened it. The screen's glow hurt my eyes in the dim kitchen. My fingers hovered over the keys before I typed, "Lorraine Foster Owens, missing 1965. The search results loaded. I scrolled past news articles about other missing persons, other tragedies. Then I found it, a scanned newspaper clipping from the Baltimore Sun, dated March 23, 1965. The headline read, "3-year-old girl vanishes from Druid Hill Park." The photograph beneath it showed a small black girl with ribbons in her hair, wearing a white dress with embroidered flowers. She was laughing at whoever held the camera. I leaned closer to the screen, searching that child's face for traces of my own. The shape of the eyes, maybe. The width of the smile. My stomach lurched. I pushed back from the table and made it to the bathroom just in time. Afterward, I sat on the cold tile floor, cheek pressed against the porcelain. The kettle was screaming in the kitchen. I let it scream. When I finally stood, my knees cracked like breaking branches. I turned off the stove and walked to my bedroom. The closet door stuck the way it always did. I had to yank it twice before it opened. Inside, on the top shelf behind my winter sweaters, sat a cardboard box I hadn't touched in 15 years. I pulled it down. Dust rained onto my shoulders. The box contained everything from my parents' house after they died, Patricia in 2008, Gerald following 6 months later, like he couldn't bear to be without her. I'd kept their papers, photographs, a few pieces of jewelry, things I couldn't throw away but couldn't look at either. I dumped the contents onto my bed. Manila folders spilled out, yellowed with age. Birth certificates, marriage license, tax returns. I found my birth certificate near the bottom, Janice Marie Mitchell, born June 15, 1965, at St. Mary's Hospital in Boise, Idaho. My hands shook as I held it up to the lamp. The paper looked official, embossed seal and everything. But the detective's words echoed in my head. Sophisticated forgery. I tilted it in the light, looking for what? Evidence of tampering? Signs of deception? It looked real, because it had always been real to me. I set it aside and kept digging. Found Patricia's diary, the one with the faded blue cover. I'd never read it before. It felt like violating something sacred. My fingers traced the worn leather before I opened to the first page. The handwriting was Patricia's neat script, dated January 1965. Another negative test today. Gerald held me while I cried. I don't know how much more disappointment I can take. I see mothers everywhere, pushing strollers, holding little hands, and I want to scream. I flipped forward. February entries detailed doctor's appointments, experimental treatments, prayer groups. Then March. The entries stopped on March 15th. Nothing until May 2nd. She's ours now. Beautiful, perfect, finally ours. Gerald says we have to be careful, says we can't tell anyone about the private adoption. He handled everything. I don't care about the details. I just know God finally answered our prayers. She's sleeping in her crib right now, and my heart is so full I could burst. The diary slipped from my hands. I stared at the scattered pages on my bedspread, words swimming together. Private adoption. God answered our prayers. Gerald handled everything. I grabbed my phone and called the number on Detective Hayes' card. It rang 4 times before she picked up. Mitchell? The adoption, was there any paperwork? Any legitimate documents at all? Hayes' voice was careful, measured. Nothing. No agency records, no court filings, no home study reports. Gerald and Patricia Owens crossed state lines with a kidnapped child and forged documentation to create a new identity. I ended the call without responding. Threw the phone onto the bed where it bounced once and settled among the scattered papers. My reflection caught in the dresser mirror, wild-eyed, hair uncombed, shirt still damp from the sink. 60 years old, and I didn't know who I was. The apartment suddenly felt too small, walls pressing in. I grabbed my coat and keys, shoved my feet into shoes without tying them. The hallway outside was blessedly empty. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, needing the physical exertion, the burning in my thighs. Outside, October wind bit through my coat. I walked without direction, passing the coffee shop where I got my morning latte, the dry cleaner who knew my name, the bookstore where I spent every Saturday afternoon, my neighborhood, my life, built on lies. My feet carried me 6 blocks before I realized where I was heading. The storage unit facility squatted between a tire shop and an abandoned grocery store, its orange corrugated walls rust-streaked and peeling. I'd rented Unit 247 3 years ago when downsizing from the house, packed it with furniture too good to donate, photo albums, boxes of paperwork I'd meant to organize someday. The keypad beeped as I punched in the code. The lock clicked open with a metallic snap that echoed down the concrete corridor. Inside, dust motes swirled in the weak overhead light. I yanked the chain to brighten the bulb, then started pulling boxes down from the metal shelving unit. Wedding photos. Patricia in ivory lace, Gerald in his navy dress uniform. I ripped the album cover, tearing through the binding until loose photographs scattered across the concrete floor. Their smiling faces mocked me from every angle. Anniversary celebrations, Christmas mornings, my high school graduation, Patricia dabbing tears, while Gerald beamed with pride. I swept them aside with my foot and attacked the next box. Tax returns dating back 40 years. I dumped them out, searching for anything about my birth. Social security cards, insurance policies, a folder labeled Important Documents that contained their marriage certificate, Gerald's discharge papers, the deed to the house they'd sold in 1985. Nothing about a baby named Janice. Nothing about an adoption that never legally existed. The third box held Patricia's personal effects from the nursing home. Her reading glasses with the rhinestone frames. A sweater that still smelled like her lavender perfume. Her purse, cracked brown leather, with a broken zipper that she'd refused to replace because Gerald had given it to her on their 20th anniversary. I upended it. Lipstick, tissues, wallet, loose change, a pill organizer with Tuesday's medication still untaken, and wedged in the inner pocket, a folded piece of newspaper so old the edges crumbled when I touched it. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The paper was yellowed, dated June 15, 1964. A small article, bottom corner of page 3, local family desperate as search for missing infant continues. The photograph was grainy, poorly reproduced, but clear enough. A young woman with dark skin and haunted eyes, holding up a baby blanket, yellow with white daisies. The caption read, "Lorraine Foster displays her daughter's blanket, hoping someone has information about 3-month-old Michelle's disappearance." Michelle Foster, born March 3, 1964. I was born March 3, 1964. At least, that's what my birth certificate said. The forged one that Gerald had obtained through whatever criminal connections he'd used to steal someone's child. The storage unit tilted. I grabbed the shelving to steady myself, metal edge cutting into my palm. Blood welled up, bright red against my skin, but I barely felt it. The newspaper clipping trembled in my other hand. Lorraine Foster. My mother. My real mother. I pulled out my phone and photographed the article, hands so unsteady the first 3 attempts came out blurred. The 4th was legible. I texted it to Detective Hayes with shaking fingers. "Found this in Patricia's purse. Need to know if Lorraine Foster is still alive." The response came within minutes. "We'll check records. Stay where you are. I'm coming to you." But I couldn't stay still. I stuffed the newspaper clipping into my coat pocket and tore through the remaining boxes with renewed fury. Photo albums flew open, their plastic sleeves ripping. I examined every picture from my childhood, looking for evidence, for anything that showed the seams of the lie. There, in a photo from my first birthday party. I sat in a high chair wearing a pink dress, cake smeared across my face. But behind me, barely visible through the kitchen doorway, Gerald stood with his back to the camera, shoulders hunched, hand pressed against his forehead. The posture of a man carrying impossible weight. Patricia stood beside him, reaching toward his arm. Her face was turned just enough to show her expression. Not joy at her daughter's milestone, but something harder. Determination. Defiance. The face of someone who knew exactly what she'd done and refused to feel guilty about it. I dropped the photo and reached for my phone again, but it buzzed before I could dial. Hayes's name flashed across the screen. "Lorraine Foster died in 1998, Hayes said without preamble. "Lung cancer, but she had a son, Thomas Foster, born 1966. He still lives in Richmond. My brother. I had a brother. Give me his address." "Janice, wait! Give me the goddamn address!" Hayes was silent for 3 seconds. Then she read off a street number I didn't recognize, in a part of Richmond I'd never visited. "I'm sending a patrol car to meet you there. Don't go alone. Don't..." I hung up and ran. Story block 6. The address led me to a rundown duplex 40 minutes outside the city limits. Paint peeled from the wooden siding in long curls, and the front porch sagged like a broken spine. I parked across the street and killed the engine, my hands still gripping the steering wheel hard enough to make my knuckles ache. A man sat on the porch steps, smoking. Mid-50s, heavy build, wearing oil-stained work clothes. Gray streaked through his dark hair. I studied his profile, searching for something familiar. The shape of his nose, the set of his jaw. Searching for pieces of myself reflected back. I climbed out of the car before I could talk myself out of it. My legs felt disconnected from my body, moving on autopilot while my mind raced through everything I wanted to say and couldn't organize into coherent words. He looked up as I crossed the street. His eyes narrowed, taking in my rumpled clothes, my unwashed hair. The wild desperation I knew must be written across my face. "Thomas Foster?" My voice came out hoarse. He took a long drag from his cigarette. "Who's asking?" "My name is Janice Mitchell. I think—" The words caught in my throat. I pulled the newspaper clipping from my pocket, my fingers trembling so badly the paper rattled. "I think your mother was my mother?" Thomas stared at me for a full 10 seconds. The cigarette burned down between his fingers, forgotten. Then he stood slowly, his movements careful, like I might bolt if he startled me. "Jesus Christ." He descended the steps, closing the distance between us. His eyes traveled across my face, hungry and disbelieving. "You look just like her, just like Mom when she was younger." My knees buckled. I locked them, forcing myself to stay upright. The world tilted sideways, and I pressed my palm against the hood of his truck, parked in the driveway, using it to anchor myself. "You knew," I whispered. "You knew about me." "Mom talked about you every day until the cancer took her voice." His words came out rough, scraped raw. "Michelle. She named you Michelle. Said you had a birthmark on your left shoulder blade, shaped like a comma." I yanked down the collar of my shirt, twisting my arm to expose my shoulder blade. The birthmark was there, small, dark, exactly where he said it would be. I'd looked at it in mirrors my entire life and never questioned what it meant. Patricia had told me it made me special, unique. Another lie woven so tight I'd worn it like truth. Thomas made a sound like something breaking inside him. He reached toward me, then stopped himself, his hand hovering in the air between us. "She looked for you for 7 years, filed police reports, hired 3 different private investigators, sold everything she owned to fund the searches." His voice cracked. "The cops said you were probably dead. Said Mom needed to accept reality and move on, but she never stopped believing you were alive somewhere." I tasted bile. My stomach clenched, and I turned away from him, bending double, fighting the urge to vomit onto his dead lawn. The morning sun felt too bright, too hot. Sweat rolled down my spine despite the autumn chill. "Patricia Owens took me." The words tore out of me. "She raised me, lied to me for 60 years. Patricia Owens." Thomas repeated the name slowly, testing it. "I don't know that name. Mom never—" He stopped, his expression shifting. Wait, there was a woman, Mom's neighbor for a while, back in 64 or 65. She had a different last name then, something with a B. Bradford? No, Brennan. Patty Brennan. Patricia's maiden name. Hayes had mentioned it during one of our conversations, buried in the background check details. "They were friends," Thomas continued. "Mom talked about her sometimes. Said Patty couldn't have kids. Something about her uterus being damaged, scarred up from an infection. Mom felt bad for her. Used to let her babysit you sometimes." His face went pale. "Oh, God." "Mom trusted her." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Patricia had befriended Lorraine, gained her trust, positioned herself perfectly to take what she couldn't have herself. She'd stolen me from a woman who'd welcomed her into her home, who'd shown her kindness. "Where were you?" I heard myself ask. "When I was taken." "School." Thomas's hands curled into fists. I was 8 years old, second grade. Mom had you at home. You were sick, some kind of cold. When I got off the bus, the front door was open and you were gone. Just gone. Mom was on the floor in the kitchen, unconscious. They said she'd been drugged. Found traces of sleeping pills in her system. My vision blurred. I pressed my palms against my eyes, but the tears came anyway, hot and furious. Everything I'd known, every memory I'd trusted, contaminated by this truth. A car pulled up behind mine. Hayes climbed out, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. She must have sent them when I hung up on her. She approached slowly, her gaze moving between Thomas and me, taking in our similar features, the undeniable connection. "We need to bring Patricia Owens in for questioning," Hayes said. "Formal charges will be filed within the hour." "She's not at home." The words came out flat, dead. "She went to Marcus's place. Her son." Thomas flinched at the word son. Hayes pulled out her phone and made a call, her voice low and clipped, issuing instructions. The officers retreated to their vehicle, coordinating with dispatch. I looked at Thomas again. This stranger who shared my blood, who'd grown up in the shadow of my absence. He'd lived his whole life as an only child, but he'd never been one. His mother had died, grieving a daughter she'd never stopped searching for. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm so sorry I didn't know, that I couldn't." "Don't." Thomas's voice was thick. "Don't apologize for being kidnapped. Don't apologize for surviving." He wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Mom would be so happy you're alive. She'd want to know you're okay." But I wasn't okay. My body felt hollowed out, scraped clean of everything I'd thought was true. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat painful, like my chest was too small to contain it. Hayes ended her call and walked back over. "Marcus Owens isn't home either. Neighbors say they saw both him and Patricia leave together early this morning, suitcases in the car." My knees buckled. I grabbed the porch railing, splinters digging into my palm as my weight dragged against the weathered wood. The ground tilted beneath me, the entire world shifting sideways. They were running. Patricia and Marcus were running, and that single fact hammered home the truth more brutally than any DNA test ever could. Hayes reached for my elbow, but I yanked away, stumbling down the porch steps. My ankle twisted on the last one, and I crashed onto the gravel driveway, palms scraping against the sharp stones. Blood welled up in thin lines across my skin. I stared at it, watching red droplets bead and spread, because focusing on that small pain was easier than acknowledging the massive one tearing through my chest. Thomas crouched beside me. He didn't touch me, didn't speak, just hovered there while I struggled to breathe. Each inhale felt like swallowing glass. My vision blurred at the edges, dark spots dancing across the pale morning sky. The nausea that had been lurking since yesterday surged up my throat, and I turned my head, retching into the dead grass bordering the driveway. Nothing came up but bile. My stomach convulsed again and again, muscles seizing until I was gasping. Sweat broke out across my forehead despite the cold air. Thomas disappeared and returned with a bottle of water. I took it with shaking hands, rinsed my mouth, spat into the grass. "We've issued an APB," Hayes said from somewhere above me. Her voice sounded distant, muffled, like she was speaking underwater. "We'll find them." I pressed my forehead against my knees, curling into myself on the ground. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. I didn't move to check it. Couldn't. My arms felt like lead weights, useless appendages I no longer controlled. Thomas pulled the phone out for me, his movements gentle. Careful. He looked at the screen, and his expression went rigid. Without a word, he turned it toward me. 6 missed calls from Gerald. 4 text messages, each one more frantic than the last. Mom's not answering. Where are you? Dad won't pick up either. What's going on? The last message had come through 30 seconds ago. Someone just called asking about Mom. A detective. Janice, what did you do? My fault. Gerald thought this was my fault. My son. No, Patricia's son. The boy I'd raised. The child I'd loved for 30 years. Thought I'd done something to hurt his mother. The woman who'd stolen me. The kidnapper who'd erased Lorraine, foster daughter, and created Janice Mitchell from nothing. I pushed myself to my feet. My legs shook but held. Hayes was talking into her phone again, coordinating with someone, setting up roadblocks maybe, or checking bus stations and airports. Standard procedure for fugitives. That's what they were now. Fugitives. Criminals. Not my parents. Never my parents. Thomas stood too, keeping pace as I walked toward my car. My keys were somewhere. I patted my pockets mechanically, found them in my jacket. My hands trembled so badly I couldn't fit the key into the door lock. Thomas took them from me without asking, unlocked the door, pulled it open. You can't drive like this, he said. I have to talk to Gerald. My voice came out hoarse, scraped raw. I have to tell him before he hears it somewhere else. Let me drive you. I wanted to refuse. Wanted to do this alone because I'd done everything alone for 60 years, even when I'd thought I had family, thought I belonged somewhere. But my body was betraying me. Adrenaline crash hitting hard and vicious. My vision kept swimming in and out of focus. The tremors in my hands had spread to my arms, my shoulders, my core. I nodded, surrendered. Let this stranger who shared my DNA slide into my driver's seat while I collapsed into the passenger side. Hayes appeared at the window, her face creased with concern. We'll need a formal statement, and we'll need to know everywhere Patricia and Marcus might go. Family connections, friends, vacation homes. Gerald, I said. Their son. The word stuck in my throat. He's at the community center on Maple Street. He doesn't know yet. Hayes's expression softened, just for a moment. Then the professional mask slid back into place. I'll send an officer to speak with him. No. I grabbed the door frame, pulled myself more upright. No, I have to be the one. I have to tell him. Ms. Mitchell? I raised him. The words burned coming out. For 30 years, I raised him thinking he was mine. He deserves to hear this from me, not from a stranger with a badge. Hayes studied me for a long moment. Then she stepped back, nodded once. I'll meet you there. 30 minutes. Thomas started the engine. My car felt different with someone else driving. The familiar sounds all wrong. He adjusted the mirrors, the seat, his movements efficient and practiced. A good driver. Lorraine had probably taught him back when he was 16, back when I was already 30, and raising a 10-year-old boy who wasn't actually mine. My phone buzzed again. Gerald calling. I let it go to voicemail, pressed the phone against my chest. The physical pressure helped somehow, gave me something to focus on besides the screaming chaos in my head. We pulled away from the house. In the rearview mirror, I watched Michelle standing on her porch, arms wrapped around herself, watching us go. Another piece of this impossible puzzle. Another person whose life Patricia Owens had shattered with her choices. Storyblock 8:10. The community center parking lot stretched before us, half empty in the afternoon light. Thomas pulled into a spot near the entrance, killed the engine. Through the glass doors, I could see movement, Teenagers playing basketball. The squeak of shoes on polished floor carrying through the walls. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I pressed them against my thighs, felt the tremor running through muscle and bone. Gerald was in there, maybe coaching the youth team like he did every Thursday, maybe laughing at some kid's joke, maybe checking his phone and wondering why I hadn't called back. The car door felt impossibly heavy when I pushed it open. My legs barely held me as I stood, one hand braced against the roof. Thomas came around, offered his arm, but I shook my head. Had to do this on my own. Each step toward those glass doors felt like walking through water. My vision tunneled, focused on the entrance, on the moment that would destroy everything Gerald thought he knew about himself. About me. A patrol car slid into the lot behind us. Detective Hayes emerged, her expression unreadable. She nodded once, stayed back by her vehicle, giving me space, letting me do this my way. The doors opened with a hydraulic hiss. Air conditioning hit my face, carrying the smell of floor wax and sweat and the industrial cleaner they used on the mats. I'd picked Gerald up from this place 1,000 times over the years. Watched him learn to dribble, to shoot, to lead. He stood at center court, whistle around his neck, demonstrating a defensive stance for 3 teenage boys. His voice carried across the gym, patient, encouraging, exactly the tone I'd used when teaching him to tie his shoes, to ride a bike, to drive a car. All those moments suddenly suspect, tainted by the lie Patricia had lived. One of the boys spotted me first, pointed. Gerald turned, his face breaking into a smile that made my chest constrict. Ma! He jogged toward me, then slowed as he got closer. His smile faltered. What's wrong? You look... We need to talk. My voice came out flat, dead. Privately. The smile disappeared completely. He turned to the boys, waved them off. Take a water break. 20 minutes. They scattered, voices echoing off the high ceiling. Gerald moved closer, his hand reaching for my shoulder. I flinched back without meaning to. The hurt that flashed across his face nearly broke me. Outside, I managed. We walked through a side door into a small courtyard. Concrete benches, a sad attempt at landscaping. The door clicked shut behind us, muffling the gym sounds. Thomas and Hayes waited by the fence, far enough to give us privacy, but close enough to intervene if needed. Gerald stopped in the center of the courtyard, turned to face me. 6 feet tall, shoulders broad from years of athletics, hands hanging loose at his sides. My son. Except he wasn't. Someone called you 10 times, he said. I saw your car outside when I was pulling in earlier, but you didn't come in. What's happening? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. My lungs felt paralyzed, ribs locked tight. Ma? His voice rose, edged with panic now. Talk to me. Patricia Owens died this morning. The words tumbled out, clinical, detached. Heart attack in her cell. She was serving time at the women's correctional facility upstate. Gerald's brow furrowed. Okay, why are you telling me this? Who is Patricia Owens? The courtyard seemed to tilt. I grabbed the back of a bench, felt the sun-heated metal burn my palm. She was the woman who took me, in 1979, from a park in Boston. I was 4 years old. His face went blank, processing, not understanding yet. Her husband, Marcus, he died in prison 3 years ago. They took me together. Raised me as their own? I didn't... My voice cracked. I forced it steady. I didn't know. Not until today. Not until detectives showed up with DNA results and files and evidence. Gerald shook his head slowly, like he was underwater. That's insane. Ma, that's not... You would have known. You would have remembered. I was 4. Each word felt like swallowing glass. They moved states, changed my name. I have fragments, pieces, but nothing concrete. Nothing that made sense until today. He took a step back, then another. His hands came up between us, palms out, warding something off. This is crazy. You're upset about something. We can figure it out. But this story? The Fosters are my real family. I pulled my phone out, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. Found the photo Hayes had shown me. The little girl with my eyes. Lorraine Foster. She's my mother, my actual mother. Michelle is my sister. I held the phone out. Gerald stared at it like it might bite him. Finally, slowly, he took it. His thumb moved across the screen, zooming in on my 4-year-old face. No, he whispered. Patricia Owens was 52 when she died, which means she was 22 when she had you. I couldn't make myself say gave birth. Couldn't acknowledge that biological connection. Gerald, if she was my kidnapper, if Marcus was her husband, don't! The word came out sharp, violent. He thrust the phone back at me. Don't say it. But I had to. Had to make him understand. You're not my son. You're their son. Their biological child. I was 8 years old when you were born. 8. I didn't give birth to you. She did. The phone slipped from my fingers, clattered on concrete. Neither of us moved to pick it up. Gerald's face had gone gray, his breathing shallow and rapid. You're lying. This is some kind of... Why would you say this? Why would you do this? I'm so sorry. The words felt microscopic, inadequate. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. He backed up until he hit the courtyard wall, slid down to a crouch. His hands covered his face, fingers digging into his scalp. The sound that came out of him was barely human, a wounded animal noise that echoed off the concrete. I moved toward him. He shot to his feet so fast I stumbled back. Stay away from me! His voice cracked, breaking on the last word. Tears streamed down his face. You're not. If what you're saying is true, then you're not. I raised you. My own tears came now, hot and fast. Every day for 30 years, I raised you. That's real. That matters. It's a lie, he was shouting now, rage and grief tangled together. My whole life is a lie. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about you, about... His voice broke completely. Detective Hayes moved closer, one hand hovering near her belt. Thomas stayed back, his face etched with pain. Gerald's fist slammed into the concrete wall. Once. Twice. Blood bloomed across his knuckles. I lunged forward, grabbed his arm, tried to pull him back. He shook me off with enough force to send me sprawling. The world spun. My hip hit concrete, pain shooting through old bones. Thomas was there instantly, helping me up. Hayes positioned herself between us and Gerald. Mr. Owens, she said, voice steady and firm. I need you to take a breath. He stared at his bleeding hand like he didn't recognize it. Then at me, still gripping Thomas's arm for balance. The look on his face, betrayal, horror, grief, would haunt me forever. Who am I? The question came out broken, desperate. If she's not my mother, if they weren't my grandparents, then who the hell am I? I pushed away from Thomas, steadied myself on legs that trembled with more than pain. Gerald stood 10 feet away, blood dripping from his knuckles onto concrete already stained with so many years of secrets. The parking garage smelled like oil and rain and the metallic tang of his blood. You're the boy who made me dinosaur pancakes every Sunday when you were 7. My voice came out steady, despite everything. The teenager who stayed up all night helping me study for my nursing exam. The man who held my hand through your father's funeral? He flinched at the word father. His jaw worked, muscles tensing and releasing. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his face, making him look gaunt, haunted. Those are stories about someone else's life. But his voice had lost its edge, gone hollow instead. I took one step forward. Hayes tensed, but didn't intervene. The weight of Thomas's folder pressed against my chest, where I'd clutched it close. Inside were documents that would destroy one life while trying to resurrect another. Michelle deserves to know her brother. I pulled the folder out, held it toward him. Lorraine deserves to hold her son, but they can't have back what was stolen. None of us can. We can only decide who we choose to be now. Gerald stared at the folder like it might bite him. His bleeding hand trembled, drops of blood falling in a steady rhythm. Drip, 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 each one marking time passing, lives diverging, choices crystallizing. You want me to just, what? Meet these strangers? Pretend we're family? His laugh came out bitter, sharp enough to cut. I want you to make your own choice. I set the folder on the concrete between us. Not because of what Marcus and Patricia did, not because of what I did, but because you decide what matters. The folder lay there, a bridge or a bomb. Gerald stared at it for long seconds. His chest heaved with breathing that sounded painful. Finally, he crouched down, picked it up with his good hand. Blood smeared across the manila surface. He opened it. I watched his face as he looked at the photos Thomas had compiled. Michelle at her college graduation. Lorraine standing beside her, pride radiating from every line of her body. Gerald's biological father in his military uniform, the same jawline, the same eyes looking back from the photograph. He's dead. Not a question. Gerald had already guessed from the past tense references. Car accident, 6 years after you were taken. I kept my hands at my sides, resisted the urge to reach for him. Lorraine said he never stopped looking. Neither did she. Gerald's thumb traced the photo of Michelle. She was laughing in it, caught mid-motion at some outdoor gathering, sunlight turning her hair to fire. His sister. The words hung unspoken between us. Does she know? About me? Thomas told her yesterday. Hayes spoke up, her voice gentler than before. She's asked to meet you, if you're willing. He looked up at me then, and I saw the war happening behind his eyes. 30 years of believing one truth. 1 week of learning it was all constructed on stolen moments, forged documents, and desperate lies. Will you come with me? The question came out small, vulnerable, the voice of a child asking his mother for comfort. My throat closed. I forced words through anyway. If that's what you want. He nodded, just once, sharp and decisive. Then stood, tucked the folder under his arm. Blood still dripped from his knuckles. Hayes gestured toward her car. I'll drive you both to the station. Ms. Foster is waiting there with her lawyer. The ride passed in silence. I sat in the back seat beside Gerald, careful not to touch him, but close enough to feel his presence. He stared out the window, jaw clenched, that folder pressed against his chest like armor. The city rolled past, buildings where we'd shopped together, restaurants where we'd celebrated birthdays, the hospital where I'd worked nights to put him through college. All of it real, all of it built on foundations of sand. The police station buzzed with activity. Hayes led us through corridors that smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. My heart hammered against my ribs. Each step felt like walking toward an execution or a resurrection. Maybe both. She stopped outside an interview room. Through the small window, I could see them. Lorraine sat with her hands folded on the table, knuckles white with tension. Michelle stood behind her mother's chair, one hand on Lorraine's shoulder. They both looked toward the door with identical expressions of desperate hope. Gerald froze. His breathing went shallow, rapid. I watched his free hand curl into a fist, then release, then curl again. "You don't have to do this now," I said quietly. He glanced at me. Something shifted in his expression. Not forgiveness, but maybe the beginning of understanding. "If I don't do it now, I never will." Hayes opened the door. The sound seemed impossibly loud. Lorraine stood so fast her chair scraped against linoleum. Michelle's hand flew to her mouth. They both stared at Gerald like he was a ghost made solid. "Brandon." Lorraine's voice broke on the name. His real name. The one I'd never called him. Gerald's hand tightened on the folder. For a moment, I thought he might bolt. Then he stepped forward, into the room, across the threshold between his old life and whatever came next. I stayed in the doorway, watching. Lorraine moved toward him with careful steps, like approaching something wild that might flee. Michelle followed, tears already streaming down her face. Gerald stood rigid, every muscle locked, but he didn't back away. "You have his eyes." Lorraine stopped 3 feet away. "Your father's eyes. I'd know them anywhere." 6 months later, the garden stretched before me in the early morning light. Tomato plants heavy with fruit that gleamed like rubies against dark leaves. I knelt on the foam pad, dirt already under my fingernails, and pulled weeds from between the lettuce rows. The physical motion calmed something inside me that still occasionally needed calming. My apartment, the new one across town, looked out over this community garden. I'd moved 4 months ago, unable to stay in the house where Patricia and Marcus had raised someone who wasn't really their daughter. Every room there had become a museum of lies. The new place was smaller, but the light came through differently. Clean. Honest. Gerald appeared at the garden gate, right on time. He came every Thursday now, had for the past 3 months. He moved between the raised beds with more confidence than his first visit, when he'd stood frozen at the entrance like he didn't know if he was allowed. "Brought coffee." He held up 2 cups from the place on 5th Street. "Extra sugar?" I straightened, pressing my hand against the small of my back. Would I forget? He handed me a cup, then crouched beside the pepper plants I'd been eyeing all week. We worked in comfortable silence. That was new too. The ability to be quiet together without the silence feeling like something that needed filling. He pruned while I harvested, our movements developing a rhythm we hadn't planned. A robin landed on the fence post, watched us with its head cocked, then flew away toward the maple trees. Michelle had called last night. She did that every Tuesday and Friday, like clockwork. The conversations were still careful, both of us walking on ground that might crack open, but they were getting easier. She'd sent photos of herself as a child, the real photos, from before. I'd stared at them for an hour, searching for myself in the curve of her cheek, the shape of her hands. Last week, she'd asked if I wanted to visit. I'd said maybe. Progress moved in inches. Gerald dumped weeds into the compost bin, then pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen, his jaw working. Mom wants to do Sunday dinner. He didn't look up. At her place. Asked if you'd come. My hands stilled on a tomato. Lorraine asked for me specifically? Said she's making pot roast. He pocketed the phone, finally met my eyes. "She's asked 3 times now. Thought I should actually tell you this time." I twisted the tomato free, felt its weight in my palm. Lorraine had tried, I'd give her that. Cards in the mail, texts through Gerald asking how I was doing, an invitation to Thanksgiving that I'd declined. She'd lost 36 years with her son. I understood the hunger that created, the desperate need to reclaim lost time. But I'd lost 60 years believing I was someone else entirely. My hunger felt different, less directed. I didn't know yet what would fill it. "I'll think about it." I placed the tomato in my basket, reached for another. Gerald nodded. He didn't push. That was something else that had changed. Both of us learning when to step forward and when to hold back. He moved to the cucumber trellis, checking for beetles. A woman entered the garden through the main gate, moving between plots with the ease of a regular. She waved at Gerald, who raised his hand in return. I'd seen her here before, but never spoken. She tended the roses by the back fence, always wore yellow gloves. "You should come Sunday," Gerald said after she'd passed. "Even just for an hour." "Why?" The word came out sharper than I'd intended. He sat back on his heels, studied me with an expression that reminded me, painfully, of Marcus in certain lights. But Marcus wasn't his father, wasn't mine either. The truth of that still landed like a punch sometimes, usually when I least expected it. "Because you're still deciding if any of this is worth it." Gerald gestured between us, at the garden, at everything the gesture implied. "And you won't know unless you try." I wanted to argue, tell him it was more complicated than showing up for pot roast. But he was right, and we both knew it. I'd spent 6 months in a strange kind of limbo. DNA test results that confirmed the impossible. Lawyers who explained my legal options in patient voices. A therapist who kept asking how I felt, and seemed unsatisfied when I couldn't quite articulate the answer. Through all of it, I'd been watching my life from outside myself, uncertain if I wanted to step back in. The sun climbed higher. Heat built against my shoulders. Gerald finished with the cucumbers and moved to help me with the tomatoes, his hands careful among the vines. We filled 2 baskets, then 3. The routine of it felt medicinal, necessary. "I'll come Sunday," I heard myself say, "but I'm not staying long." His face did something complicated, relief mixed with caution, hope tempered by experience. "That's all anyone's asking." We left the garden at 9, carrying vegetables we'd split down the middle. My apartment was a 5-minute walk. Gerald headed toward the parking lot, toward his own place on the east side, toward the life he was still trying to construct from shattered pieces. We'd both become architects of new realities, working without blueprints. Inside, I washed the tomatoes and lined them on the windowsill. Red against white paint. Simple. Real. My phone sat on the counter where I'd left it, screen dark. I picked it up, scrolled to Lorraine's last message, and typed a response before I could reconsider. "I'll be there Sunday, 5 o'clock. The reply came before I'd set the phone down. "Thank you. It means everything." I stared at those 3 words. Meant everything to her, maybe. For me, it meant walking into another space where I didn't quite fit, where the connections that should feel natural required conscious effort. But Gerald was right. I wouldn't know if any of it was worth it unless I tried. The rest of the day unfolded in ordinary movements. Lunch at the kitchen table, a book I'd been reading, a walk around the neighborhood as evening approached. At sunset, I stood at my window, watching light drain from the sky, my reflection appearing in the glass. Same face I'd always had, same eyes. But the woman looking back felt like someone I was still getting to know. My phone buzzed. Michelle, this time, right on schedule. How are you? Good, I typed back. Coming to dinner Sunday. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Really? That's wonderful. Mom will be so happy. I set the phone aside before she could ask for more. The tomatoes glowed in the fading light, almost luminous. I'd grown them from seeds Gerald had given me, from plants Lorraine had started in her greenhouse, roots growing in borrowed soil, creating something new. Maybe that was the best any of us could do. Sunday would come. I'd sit at a table with people connected to me by blood and trauma, by loss and strange fortune. We'd eat pot roast and make careful conversation and probably feel the weight of everything we didn't know how to say. It wouldn't fix anything, wouldn't give me back the life Patricia and Marcus had stolen, wouldn't restore the decades Lorraine and Michelle had lost. But it was a beginning. And after 6 months of standing still, a beginning felt like enough. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.